Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the Idaho Public Television Endowment.
This is not a red and blue issue. This is a common issue of making sure that people's basic rights are protected.
Coming up on Dialogue, a conversation with journalist Eliza Griswold about her investigation into how the practice of fracking can affect a community. It's one of our conversations from the Sun Valley Writers Conference on Dialogue. Next, stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. Journalist Eliza Griswold has reported from some tough areas, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria among them. But she says her latest project was in many ways her most difficult. For 7 years, Griswold lived off and on in western Pennsylvania, following the story of a woman whose family was affected by what is commonly called fracking. That's a method of extracting natural gas and petroleum out of rock by breaking it open with high-pressured liquid. The technique is controversial for many reasons. Griswold wrote a book about her findings called Amity and Prosperity, the names of the two towns in Pennsylvania where she spent time. I spoke with her at the 2018 Sun Valley Writers Conference about what drove her to write the book, what she learned, and how that's informed her next work. The idea for this book actually started way far away.
It did. The idea for this book came out of Nigeria, actually. I was there for my last book doing some reporting when a bridge collapsed, and I was riding an empty oil barrel. I had to get across this river, and that's what we do.
So that's what you do, is you ride an empty oil barrel.
And it was a couple of weeks after the bridge in Minneapolis, I-35W, had collapsed, and 13 people had been killed in that. And I just thought, it's really time to go back to America to look at our collective poverty and how it is that we need to invest better in our own infrastructure, in our own systems for our own survival. I found that structurally deficient bridges, the highest percentage in the country at that time, was in southwestern Pennsylvania.
So you went thinking, okay, I'm going to research this story potentially on infrastructure, roads, bridges. But as happens, and especially when you do this kind of immersion reporting that you do, one of your sources said, hey, why don't you come to a meeting with me about this industry fracking?
That's right. I mean, really, when it is talking about the collective lifeline systems in southwestern Pennsylvania at the time, that was the story of the oil and gas boom that began in the early 2000s. You had 200 trucks on dirt roads every day, diesel trucks. People had flat tires all the time because their roads were so rutted and destroyed. So really what people were starting to look at in its official term would be negative externalities. What were the costs that these companies were passing on to the communities that they were working in? Some of them were extremely temporary, like road damage, because many times companies would come in and they'd actually pave roads afterwards, and that was terrific. So they fixed things. But lots of times those negative externalities had to do with air quality and water quality, and those ended up impacting people's health.
So at this meeting, which was at the airport in Morgantown, West Virginia, you met a woman named Stacey Haney. And this is where the story takes a turn, and you move away from roads and bridges, and you're right in with this family and Stacey. And she's such an interesting character to carry this story, because she represents, as so many people do in all of our lives and isn't captured by daily reporting, she represents the gray areas.
Yeah.
She's not one thing or another. She is supportive of industry and grew up in the area, 150 years or something her family had been in the area.
Yeah.
And she had even signed a lease with one of these companies, Range Resources. But at the same time, she started noticing a whole litany of health problems in both the animals and in her children.
Yeah, you said it exactly right. She was not an environmentalist. She was not politically interested at all. She did not even want anybody writing about her. And that, for me, made her a particularly interesting person because she wasn't looking for the attention. And, you know, fracking has become such a political football. It's such...
Out here, out in the West, too, of course.
Yeah, of course, right? So depending on where somebody sits on the aisle, you pretty much know what they're going to say about fracking. And that just wasn't the kind of project that I wanted to undertake. I really wanted to get very close on the ground and carefully documented what happened in a particular case for people who were just discovering what it meant to live, you know, a quarter of a mile from an oil and gas site.
So talk about some of the things that she was not just seeing, but feeling, smelling,
Sure.
and what was going on in her family and where it apparently was coming from that made her go to this meeting and stand
Yes.
up and talk.
Yeah, so early on, so her 14-year-old son started experiencing mysterious illnesses. And they knew, you know, she had signed a lease. She signed that lease for a couple of reasons. She signed that lease because she wanted to build a barn on her farm, and that was going to cost about $9,000. And if she signed this lease, she'd get about $8,000. And she also signed it because she thought it was her patriotic duty to do so. She knew about American energy independence. Her dad had been a steel worker. The downturn of the industry impacted her community, and she thought, well, if this gas boom happens, then actually I may be able to help my family out and help the area out. But what happened as the oil and gas began, as the site began to be built, because that's really when the trouble started. The problems at the site started actually with the truck traffic. It started with the beginning of building this site, and 200 trucks a day were passing this little farm, and they were passing by 35 feet because the farm sits right by this dirt road. And the thinking is now that truck traffic, the diesel fumes attached to particulate matter, actually began to compromise her son's respiratory system. That was the very beginning. The goats were coughing, the kids were coughing, but Stacy wasn't too concerned at that point because she thought, you know, there's an expression that's used in southwestern Pennsylvania that comes with the oil and gas and the coal industry, the give and take. She thought this was part of the price of doing business, that they'd be, you know, a little bit nuisance, a little bit sick, too much truck traffic, and then the trucks would go away. But that's not what happened. Over a series of months, and then more than a year, the kids got sicker and sicker. Finally, her son was diagnosed with arsenic poisoning, and she and her daughter and her son were found to have levels of benzene and toluene in their blood. And they made those discoveries based around the death of a puppy. She talked to her neighbor at the local farm. Every year they go to the Washington County farm. And when she heard that the neighbor's puppy had died, they started putting two and two together. First it was a puppy, then it was a horse, and by that point Stacy and her neighbor thought, well, maybe whatever is sickening the animal is sickening us and our kids as well.
And but still, she didn't want to rock the boat.
She did not want to rock the boat at all. She was still supportive of industry. All she wanted was for the company to very quietly do the right thing by her and the kids. She didn't want to leave her farm. She didn't want a big payout because she didn't want to go anywhere. She wanted them to fix the problems.
And let's explain fracking.
Sure.
And what can cause these situations.
Absolutely. So fracking is a technological innovation that has to do with drilling for oil and gas. It involves drilling down as much as 2 miles, even more, straight down into the earth, and then what's called directional drilling, which in this case means horizontal, being able to drill along latitudes, and then pumping millions and millions of gallons of water, chemicals, and sand down into that well, and then being able to really propel at nearly the pressure of a shotgun blast to send that liquid, that mixture, down into the earth and out along that lateral so that it literally fractures the rock. That's the fracking. So that when that rock breaks, when there are cracks appear in the rock, it frees the bubbles of oil and gas that then come back to the surface with much of the waste. Sometimes I talk about the harvesting of carbon because this really is another kind of harvest. Drilling into the earth to get the fuel that's trapped in there and using it today.
And you mentioned that there's waste, so there are waste ponds. And isn't that where people started thinking, okay, her neighbor had a waste pond on site, that maybe this was where this poisoning was happening.
Absolutely. So the waste is the question with fracking. We're talking about it leaking into the earth, but we're also talking about it off-gassing. It's leaking into the air. What's in it, the chemicals in it, are airborne. They're highly volatile chemicals that then people were breathing in. Now, there are other ways to store the waste. The reason that in Western Pennsylvania we use ponds, or they use ponds at this time, is because the geology is such that they can't use deep injection wells. Those deep injection wells, which are primarily in Ohio and other places, have been shown to cause earthquakes. So no matter how the waste is stored, there have been problems associated with the storage of waste. But in this case, yes, we're looking at problems related to a massive 8-acre open waste pond that in time, some of the problems were as simple as it had no fence. You know, animals, foxes and deer, fell into it and possibly ripped the lining. You know, even in Pennsylvania, you have to have a fence around your swimming pool. But if you have an 8-acre waste pond, at this point, there didn't need to be a fence. So that's just some of the shortcomings around policing these ponds. Most are gone at this point, but there are a couple still in use in southwestern Pennsylvania.
Now, this was not a polemic on your part. You didn't go in to try and prove anything about fracking and say, you know, make a political statement. This was a 7-year exploration of the sociology, really, of a community that now has fracking embedded in it.
Exactly right. This was an anti-polemic. You know, there's an easy audience on either side of a project like this. And I didn't want to be feeding anybody's easy assumptions either about the community, the individuals who live there, or the process of fracking. There are millions, literally millions of pages of documentation of what happened and what went wrong at that site. So as those documents became public documents, I was able to follow what had happened at the site. So the reason that I know what I know about it is because it's all been publicly documented as a process of discovery in this lawsuit.
What I think is so interesting about what Stacey Haney eventually did is that, and in working with attorneys who were in themselves characters, and people should read the book to learn more about them because they actually came from the opposite side of the spectrum, corporate defense attorneys, and decided to work with her and others. But what's so interesting to me is that they in part decided to sue based on Pennsylvania being a commonwealth and holding these resources for the people,
Exactly.
Air, water. And also interesting to me is that the governor had done something which happened here in Idaho, which is changed the ability for local communities to have any say over the siting of these fracking holes, would you call them? Drilling?
Sites. So, okay.
So it is interesting to me, the basis for the lawsuit.
So this is super exciting because it is exactly as you say. It's very relevant to Idaho. So what happened here was basically a fight over local power. And these attorneys, John and Kendra Smith, a husband and wife team, because they'd had an experience with Stacey and her neighbors and seeing the litany of ills that had befallen these people, they took a case all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that took on the state and the governor. Governor Corbett was his name. Governor Corbett was trying to change the Oil and Gas Act. And how he was principally trying to change it is to remove the rights of local communities to zone, to police their own communities, because zoning is a police power, which means for these Pennsylvania has very strong local government. There are actually over 2,500 townships. So that strong local rule was allowing little towns to say, you're not coming in here at 2 a.m. to frack and blare your lights. You're not coming in here, this close to a school, and basically to put some rules in place. So the governor, with the industry, what they tried to do is say, little towns, you no longer have the right to do that. In exchange, we're going to give you a slightly larger piece of the pie, a little bit more tax income, but in exchange for that money, we will decide where drilling can and cannot happen. And John and Kendra Smith, along with some other attorneys, fought back, and they fought back hard. So Pennsylvania, in its constitution, has a pretty unusual clause in its Bill of Rights, and that article protects people's rights to clean air and pure water. It dates back to coal. It dates back, curiously enough, to people's exposure to the coal industry. What we call King Coal took over the whole area, and to the work of Rachel Carson, the author of Silent Spring. Her work actually helped Pennsylvania really be at the cutting edge of protecting people's environmental rights in the Constitution. But that was put in place in 1972. Since then, it's largely been decorative in the state constitution. It's like a nice clause. But John and Kendra Smith and this other team of attorneys, Jordan Yeager and others, were able to give it teeth for the first time in history, which was pretty exciting. And so they were able to block the governor from changing the law, saying, we can't guarantee that we're going to give people have the right to clean air and pure water. Can you guarantee that they'll have those rights if we allow these frackers to come in? The answer was no, and the law didn't pass. It was pretty exciting. What was also super exciting about that from a journalistic point of view was the person who found in their favor, the Chief Justice, was a conservative Republican. And so this is not a red and blue issue. This is a common issue of making sure that people's basic rights are protected.
So even though Stacey Haney, your main character, won her lawsuit having to do with the state, the problems, the health problems and the problems from the site near her, fracking site, continued, and ultimately she had to move away.
Yeah.
And she did eventually settle. There is a settlement involved here, but you don't know what
the settlement is
right?
confidential, as many settlements are.
Which is a story in and of itself, isn't it? All these non-disclosure agreements everywhere.
I recently, when I was back in the town for a book tour, was talking to a group of people, and in talking to these groups of people, often they can't say a word because they have signed one of these non-disclosure agreements in order to have enough money to go to the doctor, to buy a new house. I mean, we're not talking about big payouts. And what I do know about the settlement, and which is perfectly legal for Stacey and Beth to have told me in the course of reporting, is that it was extraordinarily disappointing. And they're left in a position where Stacey can't repair the roof on her house.
You have said that this story was harder to report for you than, say, some of the stories you've reported in Africa. Why?
Ooh, wow, you have really done your homework. I think absolutely true. This story was harder for me to report than, say, going to Eastern Congo for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm implicated. When we talk about how it is that rural Americans have paid for the energy costs of urban Americans, I am one of those urban Americans. And when I have plugged in my phone or my computer, I have thought not one whit about who is paying the cost for that electricity to flow into my house. That, and also the anger of rural Americans who feel betrayed by urban Americans, the elitism, the disenfranchisement, not only around energy, around education, around stereotypes. Confronting some of that rage was very difficult. It meant sitting and listening.
There's no easy lines in this story, just as I found in my reporting in Idaho. People can be one thing and they can be the other, and it's, you can't lump them.
You cannot lump them. I mean, I think that's so important to say. All of us contain complex identities. And if we have a responsibility as a reporter, if we're going to go out and do reporting with people who are different than we are, I feel, especially with the way that I do it over many years, my responsibility is to articulate a complexity that they have that is as complex as my own and contradictory.
Because of all the reporting you had done in an area that was supportive of now President Trump, were you surprised by his victory?
I was not surprised. What I didn't understand is what the numbers entailed. And often when people, when I go around in Philadelphia or New York or urban centers and people say, oh, you spent 7 years in Washington County, those are the people who brought us President Trump. That's not the whole story. Trump wouldn't have won unless he had the numbers in suburban Philadelphia too, places that are a little bit more uncomfortable to say, well, who there is voting for Trump? And I find myself, when we are in Philadelphia, looking around at a restaurant and thinking, who here isn't going to own up for it but voted for Trump? It's not just rural America. And so that's important to note, I think.
Was there anything that surprised you or shocked you the most about what you were seeing and learning?
What shocked me the most was that the people who live in Amity haven't had drinking water for centuries. You know, I couldn't understand that they have lived on a system of hauling water. How can that be? Well, because water wells in Amity are very expensive to drill. Sometimes you hit the aquifer, sometimes it's too deep to actually reach it. And so for centuries, people have lived on hauling water. So that, for me, this kind of very basic public poverty that people, when I started asking questions about the water, people thought I was crazy. They couldn't even conceive that this was a big deal, right? And part of what made people so angry is here you have the gas companies coming in, buying up what had been local reservoirs and trucking 10,000-gallon water trucks around areas where people they didn't even have their own well. So that disparity between poverty and wealth was etched in the issue of water. There's a theory that economists have used since the 90s that we usually use to talk about Africa or Asia. It's called the resource curse or the paradox of plenty. And the paradox is about how is it that people live on land richest in natural resources are some of the poorest in the world. And we often say, oh, that's that terrible government in X country or Y country, that's that banana republic. You know, we're different here. We're not different here. The resource curse applies in America too, and nowhere more so than it does in Appalachia.
Talk about the rage, the simmering rage that you encountered in this area towards outsiders or people that they felt were the elite and didn't understand a way of life.
Sure. So the reason is Pennsylvania has a longer history than anywhere else in the country of this rural-urban divide, which dates back before the Revolutionary War to when Scots-Irish settlers arrived and were sent by the Quaker elite in Philadelphia, sent west to settle the frontier. And they fought with Native Americans, which led the Quaker elite to actually sentence them to death. Which never ended up happening because there was such an outcry against it, but they became a buffer, and they looked at the Eastern elite as hypocrites. You're sending us west to fight for you, to defend your land, and then you're judging us for it, which again is very familiar in stories of energy extraction. You are judging me for being a coal miner, and yet you're relying on the coal that I bring to you. That's hypocrisy. So that long history of divide, of living one reality and seeing another on TV or another in Washington, D.C., I think has really fed the disenfranchisement politically, that we're seeing in a political manifestation now. I mean, we often talk about, Trump as a brick thrown through the window that rural Americans have thrown through the window of urban Americans. And again, it's more complicated than that, and we need to own that. But I think there's real truth to that.
What has been the response of both Stacey and the people in the area to your book?
I have been overwhelmed by the positive response. Now, I haven't heard from everybody in the book, and those people I haven't heard from might be displeased with it, and that's why, despite my reaching out, I haven't heard back. But I think the book is pretty fair. I made a huge effort to maintain relationships and be clear over 7 years of reporting on both sides with people who, like Stacey, smaller landowners who had really suffered at the hands of industry, and larger landowners who really had benefited and are incredibly pro-industry and are to this day and can articulate that, again, in sophisticated ways. I didn't understand the hunger for stories like this in rural communities, that the idea of being heard, of being carefully followed over a period of time, all of those, I think, have helped be healing. I mean, if I can even say that, I've been surprised by the outpouring of support for it, because you never know. Representation is a tricky thing, and you never know how people are going to feel.
Range Resources, the company at the center of this, says, although we've not had a chance to read the book in its entirety, although I'm sure officials have by now, it is clear the narrative is driven by unfounded accusations that contradict the findings of the Pennsylvania DEP, Pennsylvania courts, the US EPA, and multiple expert analyses.
I would say that's pretty much pretty clear. They haven't read it yet, but they're going to tell you what the narrative is. I think the contradiction at the heart of that reveals quite a bit about how this book has been received. But at the same time, I do want to be very clear that in every dealing that I had with the company, the representatives that I did have the honor of meeting, everybody was extraordinarily respectful and forthright as they could be. And so I myself hope that they feel that there was deep fairness in the reporting as efforts over 7 years of trying to contact them for different kinds of comments related to the catastrophe unfolding on that hillside really do attest to.
So you stand by the data in your book?
I absolutely stand by the data, which is not mine. It's a matter of public record. And many of these ponds were closed down, and the state issued the largest fine to date against Range Resources for these leaking ponds. I really don't dwell in speculation in this book. I really dwell in reported fact, because that's how I felt that I could be of greatest service as a journalist here.
Do you think you will continue to report on this story?
I don't know how I won't. My ties to the region and to the people within it are pretty profound.
I know that you often write poetry in tandem with your reporting, because some of the issues that you're still trying to work out in your mind, you don't understand, or personal issues, you put into your poetry. Is there going to be any poetry coming out of this 7-year experience in southwestern Pennsylvania?
There's a book coming out next year, and it's called Kali Yuga. And Kali Yuga is the age of degeneration in Vedic teaching. So the understanding is that we are in the end of the world. And we're about 5,000 years in, and it lasts for another 427,000 years. So it's a book about apocalypse, and this is certainly a story that makes us question what we're doing to ensure our own survival, and what kind of blindness and blinkered living we're doing, and what kind of costs we're passing on to other people in order just to flick on our lights.
How do you remain hopeful?
It's the work itself. I often think about the St. Francis prayer, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And the idea is just being the instrument. So sometimes I think I'm a kind of a translator. Sometimes I literally am a translator, like translating Afghan women's poetry. But other times it's just a matter of bringing one way of being into the lives of others. And, that in itself is the act of hope. It's not enough. But being of service, I feel like, is the best that I can do on an individual level.
Well, I so look forward to reading more of your work, and I encourage our viewers to read it as well. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you for such a thoughtful interview.
You've been listening to journalist Eliza Griswold, the author of Amity and Prosperity. Our conversation was taped at the 2018 Sun Valley Writers Conference. My thanks to the organizers of that event for allowing us to interview some of their fascinating speakers. For more information, including how to stream our more than 50 conversations from the conference, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the Idaho Public Television Endowment.